All right, everyone. It is a very windy day here in Boston. I'm in Dorchester Heights now, and this is the exact spot along where the American readouts on Dorchester Heights were placed, overlooking Boston Harbor, that forced General Howe to cede the ground. Now, Washington needed to take this area mainly because they had to control the harbor. From his encampments in Cambridge and in Roxbury, they had no way of threatening British shipping. And the Brits were still able to get supplies into the soldiers in Boston proper. They had to be able to control this high ground to prevent the shipping from coming in and out. That's why this land was so important. Howe also knew this and was trying to figure out a way to fortify it himself, but he didn't believe that the American army had the capacity or the equipment to get over here, so he didn't make it a very, very high priority. So when Washington makes this move, he does it in the middle of the night. It's a couple of nights planning. So from Cambridge, he has to start a diversionary attack to shoot at the British, hoping the British will fire back. The British oblige him in that request, and that noise from the returning gunfire and him shooting at the British shooting back covers the sound of the wagons moving. The only problem left is he's also got to hide them. They decide to do that by create what they call chandeliers. Now, what I mean, I don't mean like glass, ceiling fixtures. And they build these wooden structures and they fill them with hay. And these structures of hay bales would then be set along the pathway where the cannons were going to be traveling to hide them from the views of the British. You also, during this time from the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th of March, coming from Cambridge over to Dorchester Heights, they weren't allowed to say anything. You weren't allowed to speak louder than a whisper, because it's just a slight sound. You could hear it in Boston proper. They wanted to make sure this was kept very, very quiet. So when they fortify this area, and you can just kind of see the Boston skyline behind me here, bring it closer. Don't forget, none of these houses, none of this is actually here at the time. This is all, quite, new development, obviously. But at this time, it was a clear shot, clear view of the encampments where the British were being, housed, and all their supply lines. Now, what also made it difficult is, there were thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of American soldiers surrounding Boston. But not everyone in the countryside supported the revolution. They weren't all patriots. There were a lot of loyalists. And those loyalists swarmed into Boston. And the British regulars had to not only take care of themselves, feed themselves, but they also had to feed all these loyalists. And so when Washington was able to successfully fortify this hill, Howe, the next morning, when he looked up and saw the fortifications, he said, my God, these fellows did more work in one night than my army could do in 3 months. And this isn't the first time the Americans have done this. So forget, during the Bunker Hill fortifications, the Americans were able to fortify Breeds Hill and the Bunker Hill area beyond what the British thought the Americans were capable of doing. And this was a shock. Now, Howe wanted to try to recreate the successes he had at Breeds and Bunker Hill, but terrible weather and storms prevented his army from being able to cross the river and get into Dorchester. And it also would have been, this is a very, very steep hill. This is much steeper than that of Breeds and Bunker Hill. It would have been a very difficult undertaking for him to do, and it just was believed that he didn't have the means to do it. So this is spring 1775, and this goes into the full year of 1775, through most of the early winter months of 76 into March. This has been going on for about 11 months, this siege of Boston. It isn't July 4th yet. They have not declared independence. The independence would still be months away. So the Washington had no authority to really capture all the British, take them all prisoners of war, because as far as the British were concerned, this was still a rebel. But as far as the Americans were concerned, they were just trying to get back to the way things were in 1763. That's what they wanted. They were hoping to still be part of the British Empire. The Olive Branch petition had been sent, in July of 75. They hadn't gotten a response yet. They wouldn't get that response until the British would come into New York in September of 76. Washington stays in this area until April, kind of taking inventory, figuring out what his next moves are, and trying to decide what Congress wants him to do, because he really had no mandate other than get the British out of Boston, which he has succeeded. Even though Stephen at his height of his power, he might have been able to capture, completely disorientate the British soldiers here in North America. But without the mandate from Congress, he really wasn't able to do much other than he promised the British that he would let them leave as long as the British promised not to burn Boston to the ground. Don't forget, this whole time, they had cut down all the trees. All the wooden pews and stuff inside the churches had been chopped up for firewood. Houses that had been damaged had then been used as a way of creating fires. Now, the monument here, I'll show you a little bit about the monument. This monument has been here since 1902. We're in Southie, in South Boston. I'm going to get you all the way up. All right, so this monument here dates back to 1902. Now, what happened is, this hill became a reservoir. This was, Boston had kept growing. People were still living here. They were doing their lives. The country was moving forward. And this was actually, around this hill was actually a giant reservoir. And they, settlers from Ireland were coming in from all over Ireland, and they were coming here to Boston, especially the Southie, and they needed schools, they needed infrastructure, they needed things that they didn't have. And so the city of Boston decided, okay, well, we're going to have to do something. But they also realized that they couldn't just remove and disregard all the historical landmarks left over from the Revolution, because they wanted people to still be able to remember this area and know the significance of this area, for generations to come. So the Irish wanted a school. Okay, we're going to give you a school. And they got that school. But this monument right back here, there was a $25,000 amount of money set aside, along with the school, that they were going to have to build this monument to commemorate this hill for its importance in the leaving of the British and its part in the Revolutionary War. Now, Evacuation Day, ironically, is also on St. Patrick's Day. Now, that wasn't lost on Washington. I don't think it should be lost on Boston. I mean, Boston is known for its Irish immigrants. It's large Irish population, so it shouldn't be lost on just the divine coincidence that this significant moment in American history, especially in Boston history, happened on St. Patrick's Day. This didn't escape Washington at the time either. There was actually a code word to muster in on this day to prepare for the American army to retake and reclaim Boston as the British were leaving, and that was St. Patrick's. So that was one of the ways of being able to get the muster, to know that you were supposed to be there, know that you were part of this team. And I think it's significant that, that wasn't lost on them then, and it shouldn't be lost on us now. The significance of history, sometimes it's coincidence, sometimes it's by design, but it's very important that we don't lose some of that, the coincidences, the ironies of things. And this is really the end of the beginning for the American Revolution. Massachusetts got this thing started. They got it underway. They had, the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party, the battles of Lexington and Concord, which were mostly just skirmishes, the actual full pitch battle, which was, Bunker Hill. And then you come into the Siege of Boston, which, Bunker Hill was kind of part of. And then it goes all the way, basically from April 19th of 1775, all the way to March 17th of 1776. And from this point, Boston has done its job. Massachusetts is largely kind of out of the war after this. Washington stays, until April. And then he anticipates that the British will come back. He knows that they haven't been defeated. They come to find out that the British aren't going to, hear the requests of the Continentals for the olive branch petition, and so at this point they have to prepare for the long haul. Washington anticipates that the British will return, and he believes they will go to New York. He is correct. And so Washington sets his sights south to start defending the city and the harbor of New York, and that's where the next chapter of this great American Revolution will take place. I hope you've enjoyed following me along this areas of, the Boston area, the American Revolution, from the Battle Green to the Commons in Lexington to the Bridge at Concord, to all the different little sites I've kind of taken you through. I hope you've really kind of enjoyed this little tour I've been doing. But we are on to the next chapter, and we will be going into New York. I'm going to take you down into Boston a little bit before I leave, and kind of walk the streets, so you can kind of get a little looky-loo at some of the things down there. And I'm glad you've enjoyed this journey so far, and I will see you guys all very, very soon. Stay healthy, stay wealthy, and as always, stay wise, America.